little tiny algorithm that needs to be built in order to enable that application to exist. So this ecosystem is not only the largest in the world, but it's also the most compatible. All of these modules work very well together. The graph on the right, the blue line is again the module growth, but the red line is the growth of package downloads. So you can see that as package growth is growing tremendously, downloads of packages and installs of packages are growing even faster. They're now at a little over 3 billion a month. And that's mainly because our user base is growing so tremendously. So Node is just, the number of users is just exploding. We have consistent year-over-year 100% growth in the user community. Right now that means that we're at about 3.5 million active users. And this time next year we'll be at 7, because that's what 3.5 plus 3.5 is. And this is happening not just in startups, but across enterprise and IoT. And just looking at our member list, you can see a mix of new startups, cloud companies, enterprise companies. Everybody's coming to the table. And just today, we're actually announcing that Google joined as a silver member. So that's like a really big deal, and we're really happy about that as well. If you're here from a company, chances are you're dependent in some way at your company on Node.js. So if you don't see yourself up here, talk to me. Sorry for the shameless plug, but it's kind of my job. So this is the new full stack that software developers have to contend with. It's kind of terrifying, right? It's not just a front end and a back end anymore. We have tablets and mobile and desktop applications and all these different cloud services, and now we throw IoT into the mix. So now I'm not just building a back end and a front end. I've got to work on light switches and dryers and drones. And this is a very difficult thing for a lot of developers to get their heads around, because they have so many different moving components, and there's not a lot of transferable skill sets between all of these, except for Node. So we're really the only credible platform that can scale across this entire stack. In mobile and tablets, you have things like Cordova, which leverages and brings the entire Node.js ecosystem of 250,000 packages into the development of software for those platforms. We've completely changed the way that modern web development happens. There are now front-end compile chains that almost every new developer is working on. Even new front-end web frameworks like React are actually built as Node.js compile tool chains. We've even started innovating in desktop applications. So using Node.js and web technologies, you can now build desktop applications on stuff like Electron. Everything from the Slack desktop application to the Atom editor are built on this technology, leveraging the entire Node.js ecosystem. Microsoft's new Visual Studio Code editor is built on Node.js and web technologies on top of Electron. This is tremendous. And of course, we're very big in cloud, and not just in startups, but in enterprises as well. So as the whole world moves towards microservices and towards Docker, we're an amazing fit for this, because we're very efficient on a per processor level, where we can do a lot of I/O with very little resources. And as you start cutting up more machines into more containers, that starts to really matter. We're also front and center in almost every cloud offering, from Google, Joyent, Red Hat, IBM, Amazon. There's not a cloud platform that doesn't put us somewhere front and center. And also, really exciting, we're starting to see a huge amount of adoption in IoT. So there were a number of IoT platforms that came out this year from Intel and Samsung and Arduino and Raspberry Pi. And on all of these platforms, Node.js runs on the device. This is a tremendous win for us. We didn't think that we would get adopted that fast. But it's also a huge win for them, because now their development environment has 250,000 packages that'll work on it. As we get adopted in all of these different places, it creates this amazing feedback loop. So if I write my drone code in Node.js, you can bet that the server that I send the data to, I'm going to use Node.js as well, and I'm going to do the data processing there. And if I want to visualize that data in the front end, you can bet I'm going to use Node.js for that front end as well, because it's a transferable skill set. The web did something amazing for application development. It amateurized it. It brought in an entire new generation of programmers into the field of application development that didn't have access to it before, because the technologies were too hard and complicated. Node.js is bringing that to the rest of computing, to IoT, to cloud, to desktop, to mobile, to everywhere. Because if software is going to eat the world, then it's important that as many people as possible have access to participate in that software development. You can get involved on GitHub. Everything is on GitHub. Literally, we've done an amazing job on open governance and transparency. I don't have time to talk about that, but Rod Vegg is going to talk about it, I believe, tomorrow, so you should see that if you're interested. And hand it back over to Jim.
Thank you. I love the Node.js community because I think they are emblematic of modern developers, right? I mean, like 3.5 million. I mean, you just look at the scale of that community, how they just organically solve problems. But they're also emblematic of the need that I was talking about this morning to sort of think earlier about what does governance mean, sort of avoid maybe a forking situation that could have been prevented ahead of time. These are all things that, as you're here this week, I encourage you to talk to people. If you're not familiar with the key participants in the Node community, they're here this week. Talk to them. Hear from them how modern developers think, and particularly how they think about open source. And speaking of modern applications need an API. Who doesn't need an API? And I'm going to have Jeff Borak come up, a founding member of our Open API initiative, to tell you about that exciting project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, or good, not quite afternoon. Good morning. There we go. I can't quite see you. The lights are bright, but I know you're out there now. Again, my name is Jeff Borak. I work as part of the Open Technologies group, and I'm going to do an unlightning talk. That means I can take about a half hour, right? So creating APIs remains challenging. Is that an understatement? How many people out here have worked on API creation in the last year or so? That's a good mix. So, what do you do? As a consumer, who do you call? What do you call? What do you do with respect to documentation? Do you hope for a decent SDK? And certainly, as a provider, making the documentation work for the individual is really hard. Supporting users is really, really hard. None of this is really new news. And in fact, it's a problem the industry's been trying to solve. And in fact, IBM has taken a run at this a time or two. It's very difficult. And really, only in open source could something like this, I think, really come together and start to work.